Hello, and this is video number 2 on module number 2, the color palette. And we just finished, if you started video number 1, we finished the planning for iteration number 2. And the problem formulation or our scope is that the user will enter a value that represents the degree of red in color, and the app will use this value to generate a color and display that color to the user. We divided in the solution formulation, we followed the model view controller. In the model, we said we need to represent the red value and the color value, and the red value is a decimal number, so we're using the float library or the float type. UIColor is the library that we're going to use to represent a color, and UI stands for user interface. And then in the view, we are going to use a UI slider to allow the user to give us a value between 0 and 1, and we're going to use a UI view to display a color. We're going to change the color of a UI view, so we added both of them here as models. And I encourage you, we have here 4 libraries, so go to the library and learn more about them and about the tasks or the functions that they have in order to see how you can utilize it. In the controller, what the controller will do or what the app will do, and when the app should do it. So we said the when or the event that will trigger the creation of the color is when the user makes a selection of the slider, and what the app should do at that time. We said the app need to retrieve the value that the user selected, use that value to create a color, use the color to change the background of the view. How are we going to do that? Then once we reach the question of how, we replace that question, say, is there a library or a library method or a function that allow us to do this? And then in the solution implementation, we're going to create the Xcode project, add the UI slider component, add the UI view component, and then we need to connect these components to our controller in order to get everything to work. And I want to talk for a second about this before we go ahead and start working. So here is your view, and I want you to think of this as a box. And on this view, there will be a component, a user interface component called the slider, and there will be a user interface component called the view. Now, the user will interact with this component. The user will move the slider and will see the resulting color on the view. The controller for the app sits right here. This is our controller. And the user doesn't see that. This is hidden in the memory of the device running inside the operating system platform, the operating system. But for the controller, this has the instructions for the memory of for the processor of the computing device, which is your phone, to execute the steps we have for retrieve the data from the user, retrieve the data from the slider, create a color, set the color. So the controller will retrieve the data, retrieve the value from the slider, create a color, and then display the color back on the view. In order for the controller to retrieve the value and to set, the controller and the components on the view need to be connecting together. As you can see here, the controller is a box separate from the other box. They don't see each other, they don't know each other. The only way for them to cooperate with one another is if there is a connection. So we need to establish a connection between the slider and the controller so that the controller can read the value from the slider. In the same token, we need to establish a connection between the controller and the view so that the controller can give the view a color. There are 2 types of connections that you can connect between a view and a controller. The first connection is called an outlet, and the outlet connection is used to communicate data between the controller and the view. The second connection is called an action connection. The action connection connects a user action with a controller function. When the user takes an action on the view, the operating system captures that action and notifies a controller function. So we need to make a connection between the component and that action. So trying to find the color I didn't use, black. So here the user will make an action on the slider. The user is going to change the value of the slider. So the slider needs to have an action connection to the controller in order to execute a certain module or a certain function on the controller. So this is what the connect is about. So let's go ahead and play with that stuff. So we open Xcode and go to create a new Xcode project. We're going to choose an iOS application, single view application, and go next. Give Xcode a moment to load. Then go next. You provide the product name. And I like, for the purpose of our work, if you are doing this for our class, is to put your last name with the project. It makes things easy for me. The organization name and then the organization identifier. If you have access to Apple Developer, and if you are with us in the university, we can add you to our university account. Just email me about that. And if you are watching this outside the university, if you have an Apple Developer account outside the university, you will have this organization identifier. You have to add that when you create your profile, provisioning profile. In the language Swift, device is iPhone. Xcode will read your latest settings, so after a while we don't really need to talk about this. And then next, see where you want to save your project. Word of advice: do not save to a USB drive or a network drive. Always develop locally, and after you finish development, then copy to the network drive that you want. When you save the project, it will create a folder. Here is the project for module 1. And whenever you need to move the application, that is the folder that you need to move. So figure out where you saved and remember that, because you will need it. The the single view application template gives us a storyboard and gives us a view controller. There is a launch screen and you can set it up here from the configuration. I'm not going to be really using the launch screen, so I'm going to change the launch to go directly to the main storyboard, so we don't have to wait on that launch. You can, if you want to make a launch screen and make an icon, go ahead. This is where you set up both of them. One also point, if you are moving your app between different computers, the deployment target may not be the same. So if you go to another computer and you get an error or something, just to open this and select the deployment, the version of the platform that's on your computer. Maybe you are on a computer without a recent update, so this is where you can make that change so your app can work on any, you can move your app easily between computers. So that's the configuration. We have the app delegate.swift, which is the interface between our app and the iOS platform. We're not going to touch this for our for this series. And then the view, the storyboard presents to you the view, and the controller that's attached to this view is the view controller.swift. How did I know that this is attached? If you select the view from the storyboard and go to the identity inspector, which is the third icon in the utility area, you will see the name of the class, view controller. That's exactly the name of this class. In a later video in this module, when we make our own view, you will see that we're going to make our own view, our own controller, and connect them together. The view comes here due to the auto layout, which is a powerful feature, but unfortunately we're not going to talk much about it here. But if you want to learn it, search for auto layout and learn more about it. Come to the widths and let's set it to the iPhone. So that's the setting for iPhone. And then we need to execute our tasks, add a UI slider component. The component on the user interface will be here in the utility area, in the third button, which is the object inspector, and just scroll down and look for a slider. Along the way, learn about these components, like stop and see what is a button, stop and see what's a text field, what's segmented controller, and feel free to try things out. Don't be afraid to try it and it's not work. Don't let yourself get frustrated. So try things out. If you figure it out, that's cool. If not, just remove it and continue working. Here is a slider. It gives you a description. If you click it, give you a longer description. Hopefully. Yep, here it is. I just rushed. And it tells you the name, what it looks like, what library module this component is based on. This is the library type. Here it's called UISlider, UI for user interface. This tells you exactly what it is and what it do. You can drag it from here like we did with the label and set it on your view. You can adjust the size the way you want and switch to the attribute inspector. And in the attribute inspector, you see lots of attributes for the slider. There is the minimum value, which is very important because we have in our problem statement, there is a minimum and a maximum 0 to 1. This is the initial value. You can set it to an initial value of, oops, I messed up. It needs to be 0 to 1. And if I wanted to make this 0.3, but it went way down. You can change this. This is the original value that will come. I'm going to use this slider to display the red color, so I'm going to change the color of the minimum one to be red. And the maximum is the other one. I'm going to leave it blank so that when the user closes, it's like they're filling the red color. And I'm going to change this one to be red as well. And that's all what I need to finish really. You can do more if you want to do, but I don't think I need to do any more here. The second component that I need to add is the UI view. So again, continue looking until you find the view. Here is a view. And the view is simple. It says it is of type UI view. It's a structure for drawing and handling event. It claims a rectangle region for its enclosing, whatever, and so on. So it's just to represent an area. It makes an area, and I really need it to change a color so that the user can see a color. You may do this part differently and display the color to the user using something different. It's up to you. So you bring it here, as you can see, it's a rectangle region. I'm going to change its dimensions a little bit. I want to leave it like that with the background the same as the other view, so the user is not seeing it initially, and when the user moves the slider, they will start to see a changing color on the view. So here I built my view. I added the UI slider, I added the UI view. Let's go ahead, run the app and test it. Say, oh, I probably clicked it twice. So we'll wait for the simulator to open. It takes time the first time you load the simulator, and then after that the app, when the simulator is open, the app comes quickly. If it takes too long for whatever reason, you can stop and launch again and it will come faster, which is what I'm gonna do here. Here is the simulator, and here is our slider. You can move the slider, and as you can see, the slider moves with you, but nothing happens. Why did the slider move? Because this is a behavior. Remember, the slider is a library, and the library has a lot of the features, a lot of the common features, so you don't have to worry about it. So any sliders need to be able to move. So why do every programmer need to make the slider move? So the library already moves the slider for you. But the resulting action from moving the slider, that changes. Every app is different. So that part is custom. So you have to do it yourself. So now we need to move to the next step, which is connecting the slider action to our controller, so that the event of moving the slider, which is this, see, I'm making an action, I'm generating an event. The operating system is capturing this event and sending a notification, but at this time, the slider is not connected to, there's no connection between, no action connection between the slider and the controller. So when the operating system captures that slider action, it doesn't do anything, nothing is happening. To make the connection, we start by displaying the assistant editor. So I can see the user interface and the controller side by side. And maybe it is good here to make some room here by closing the utility area and the project area, the project navigation area. If you select the slider, press the control key, drag from the slider to the class, you can see here in the tooltip, you can insert an outlet, an action, or an outlet connection. So I move down because I like to leave these two overridden functions, which standard. I like to leave them in the beginning. Release, and when you release, you see here the connection. It tells you these are the types of connection. Forget about collection for now. We'll get back to it in module 4. There's an outlet and there's an action. An outlet connection is used to communicate data between the view and the controller. The action connection is used to communicate an action event from the controller to the view. So here I want to establish an action connection between the slider and the controller. So it asks you, what is the name of the function on the controller that should be notified? That function doesn't exist because this is a brand new controller. It's a custom controller. It only has some functions from its parent, its base, which is, we talked about it in module 1. And these two are there, but I'm not going to use it, so I need to make my own. So here we're going to create our own. So we give it a name, change color. This is called camel case, when you start with a lowercase word and then uppercase every word afterward. Since this is going to be a function, I start the name with a verb. So I say change color. It asks you here with an argument. Do you want the operating system, as it receives notification and notifies this function, do you want it to pass something to the function? You can say, I don't want the operating system to give me anything. Or you can say, I want the source of the event, which is the sender, referring to sending the event. Or you can say, I want the sender, which is the source, as well as the nature of the event. Sometimes there are components that have different types of event, and you will see in a moment. So in our case, I'm not really going to use any of them, so I'm going to use none. The type is the type of the argument. And I'm not going to do anything here, so there's no type of the sender, so I'm not going to change it. And then these are all the events that the UI slider is capable of sending. Value change, that's the event that's actually happening, that the user is changing the value of the slider. And when the user change the value of the slider, I want you to notify this new function. Let's see what Xcode will do when we make the connection. Xcode is very helpful. Once we made a connection, it creates a function for us. It knows that I need to have a function. It uses the name we provided as the name of the function. And because we said I don't want any argument, the parentheses here, which represents the parameters of the functions, are empty. A function starts with an open curly brace and a closed curly brace. And inside those are what we call the body of the function. That's where you put the instructions. Something very nice that Xcode does, it gives you this circle, which if you hover your mouse, it shows you that there's a connection. If something wrong happened and you don't see that plus, you see like an empty circle, it means that the connection is broken. Maybe you deleted something by mistake. You can just start from the circle, move back to the component, and you can make a connection one more time. You can also right-click on the view controller symbol, and that will give you a view of all the connections and all the outlets that are here. If there is an error, you will see an exclamation mark in yellow. And if you see that, all you need to do is to delete it from here. In beginning, I have seen every beginning learner, you will get these types of errors when you try to run the application, and it will give you an EXC error and like lighten a certain thing with green and it stops everything. If you open this view, controller view, you will see a yellow, in 99% of the cases, a yellow triangle. That means that a connection error is happening. Somehow delete the yellow thing with an X and you will be good to go. So here we establish the connection to a function. I also need to make a connection to the data. So I'm still with the slider. I need to connect to the slider again, but this time I need an outlet connection to the slider. An outlet connection is the one that allows me to read the data from the slider. So here I connect the slider and it's an outlet connection. This will create a variable. It will create a variable, or in other words, it will create memory, allocate memory under the control of the view controller that has a specific identifier or name with the type UISlider, because this is the library type for this slider component, and allow and connect to the data between the two. So whatever data this component has will be available to this variable. So we call this something, I'm going to call it SLD for slider, and red because this will be the memory location or the variable that represent the value of the red slider. So once you hit enter, you see here Xcode added this line. Outlet meaning that this value is a connection to the view, and var, we learned about this before. This is a keyword to indicate I want to create a memory location of something that will change its value. In module 1 we used let. Let means the value will not change. This is the identifier name I received, and you can either specify data, which is good, or you can leave Xcode figure the data by itself. A colon means you will define the data. UISlider, that's the type or the library definition on which this identifier should be created in memory. It's something that defines few things. Number one, what is the size of memory? How many bytes should we allocate for this? Number two, what data attributes should this have? What function should this have? All of this is defined in the UISlider. And you can open the documentation to review the slide. The exclamation mark here is something new for Swift, which is very nice, although it will take you some time if you have background to get used to it. This is optional, meaning that if there is a possibility that this slider connection will have no value, which exists every time you going outside the value, there's a possibility that you will get nothing. If that is the case, if this is created and it doesn't exist, the exclamation mark allows the platform, the language, to complain or to force you to treat this to avoid the memory crash. Memory crash or app crash in memory is when your app suddenly stops. Have you ever used any of the apps on your phone and suddenly the app stops working and closes down? We call this crashing. Something wrong is happening with memory. This is a big problem. So those languages, Objective-C as well as Swift, they are really taking strides to help enforce better memory management and force the programmer to make the right decisions and discover if the memory, if the object you're trying to use doesn't exist in memory, then treat it and deal with it. The exclamation mark tells Xcode that we know what we're doing. Do not bother us. Meaning that I know that this is optional. I know that it may not have data. Let me deal with it my own way. If you don't use the exclamation mark, you have to deal with it somehow in your code. So this is easier and better to do, and the template provides this for us. So now we established that data connection. We have another data connection I need to establish, which is the view, because that's where I'm going to create my color. So make a connection for both of them here. And here is an outlet, a view, and then I will call this color view. or something. Call it anything. This is the view that will display the resulting color. Then we have the steps. So now we set up everything. What should happen now? We actually set up the structure, meaning that once the user moves the slider and the operating system captures that notification, that happens automatically as a result of using the library. The operating system will now know that the slider is connected to this action. So once the slider value change event takes place, it will notify this function. Inside that function, you put the steps you need to happen, the instructions of what need to happen. So what do need to happen? Well, let's use common. Step number 1, we need to retrieve the value of the slider. We need to know what does the user want the red to be. Then we need to create a color using the value of red. Then step number 3, we need to use the color to change the background of the view. These are the 3 steps that we need to do. Now I made all the connections to this. Let me close out. I no longer need the assistant editor. So I go back to the single editor, and you can navigate to the files from here, by the way. So I switch to the controller, and let's start with the retrieving the value from the slider. Where is the value? The value is in this slider red. So slider red. This is a library that has member functions. So let's see which function did the dot. The dot give you access to the attributes and the functions of this component. So we need to look for the one that can give us the value. Look here, there are so many of them. So many of them. You can look and search all of them, or you can learn, or you can go to the documentation. Here is a one, value. The value contains the receiver's current value. Click on more. That will take you to the documentation of the UISlider and take you to value to know what value is. Value is a property, an attribute, contains the receiver's current value. This is how it looks like in Swift. That's the name. It is a variable, meaning that it allows value to change, and here is the type, float. This is the exact same type that I said I'm going to use to represent this non-decimal number. There's also a description here of what this is. So I come here and say I need to use the value. Notice that value gives you back red. It gives you back float. See, it gives you back value. The way this is written, it tells you that this is called return, what this property will give you back. So this value will give you back something. So I need to assign it somewhere. So to assign it, I can say let. I'm using let because I'm not going to change it. If I think I'm going to change it, I can use var. Var and let. Let is for if you want to define a constant, which is something that you assign a value to and it doesn't change. Var is something you assign a value to and you can keep assigning in later instructions. So I'm going to call this red value. And you can say, you can leave it like this without specifying a type, because Swift is smart. It will recognize that it is returning a float, which is unambiguous. So it will create this red value of type float. Or you can be explicit and say float here. Either one is fine. Then we need to create a color using the value of red. How would I do that? I know that the UIColor is the type, so I can go to the library documentation, which by the way I can access from going to Window, Documentation and ABI Reference, or Help, Documentation and ABI Reference. Both of these give you access to this window, Documentation and ABI Reference. In the search, let me search for the UIColor. So here is UIColor, so I can switch to it. It gives you a description of what this is for, and then here are tasks. There is a creating a UIColor. That's a task from component values. and different ways of creating a UI color. So there are already preset colors and there are component values. There is, if you know a white and alpha, if you know red, green, blue, alpha, whoa, that's the one that we want. So here is one. If I click on it, it gives you a description. This is the way it looks like, color with red. It has green, blue, and alpha, meaning that it takes 4 values and it returns a color object using the specified opacity, which is the alpha, and the RGB, which is the red, green, and blue. The plus here meaning you can use the UIColor library type in order to access it. If you review most of these tasks, you will see a dash here, which means you have to initiate and create a color first. We'll worry about this in later project. For now, here is the one that we're going to use. So we come here and say, in the Swift, actually, this is the this task. So in Swift, we just use the UIColor, and then we open a parentheses, and here are the different creations of the UIColor. So here is the one that has the red, the green, the blue, and the alpha. Each one of them is CG float or core graphics float. That is a type that is similar to float. So they are both work fine. Notice that I have to provide a value for each one of them. Now I retrieve the red value from the slider. So here, instead of this, in place of this very first one, I use red value, and I'm just typing Xcode discovers what you want to do. Just select it, hit the tab, you go to the second one. For now, I don't want any green. So 0, blue 0, alpha 1. Alpha has to be 1. If alpha is 0, that will be opaque, so there will be no value in here. And Xcode is complaining, oh, it doesn't need, we don't need this green or blue or alpha. So this is the UI color. And we are getting this small, all right. And now we're moving to, it says extra argument. We'll assign this now to a color, and we'll figure that extra argument in a moment. Let color, and that be your UI color. And extra argument in call. So we know that this is the way it is written. There shouldn't be an issue here. I'm going to product and build and see if this will get rid of that. Nope. Let's put back the name. And I am trying to figure out what that is, which is a good exercise. We figure it out together, and we are getting still that extra argument green. Extra argument meaning that the UI color, it's not recognizing what that is. So let's delete it and maybe type it again. So UI color, and we're looking for the red, green, and blue and alpha. So we'll use the red value, and we want to use 0 here, and in the blue 0, and in the float 1. And we are still with that. We clean this. Alright. Still here is this coming back. So let's see, maybe the type different because there was a CG float here and this is float. So let's change the type, CG float, like we did with the in the previous project. See if this fixes it. So that fixes it. So what was going on here is that this is a type float, and each one of those needed a CG float. So we had to make the type change. We ran into an issue like this in module number 1 as well, where we had the unsigned int32 and the int. So we changed that. I didn't need to do it with 0 because 0 can take any type, but I may need to do that as we move on to previous iteration. Now that I have the color, I need to use the color to change the background of the color view. So I come here and say color view, and say background color, that's an attribute, equal color. So I assign the color to the attribute named background color, that is an attribute of the UI view. This is why I made the outlet connection. This is why I connected the component, so I can have access to these attributes in the component. So it's only 3 instructions, and the way the instruction is done, on the right side usually is a library and a function that gives you back something. You use the assignment operator to save it in a local memory that you have access to. Then you use another library to do something with that value. So I passed this value as the red and made a type conversion, because this library gives me the value as a float, but this library needs the value as a core graphics float, so I had to do conversion. And then assign it to another value. And notice that I used the optional here, the optional type, so I did not specify the type UIColor. And then I assigned that color to the library. So here, the library color view, the attribute background color is on the left side because I'm putting data in there. I'm assigning to it. Whereas in the previous steps, I was getting the data from them. So I was retrieving from the library. And now let's test it. So we run. If everything works well, when I make a change to the slider red, I should see the color. And as you can see here, as I go to the right, I'm adding the full value of the color red. And if I go 0, that is color red 0. So that will be red 0, green 0, blue 0. That's the black color. Red 1, green 0, blue 0. That is the red color. So that completes our iteration number 2, and we were able to use a value from the red color between 0 and 1 that the user selects in order to mix a new color and show that color to the user. In the next video, we'll move on to other iterations.